Needle felting needles, what do they do and which ones should you use for which project? My name is Charlotte Allen and you've reached my channel, The Felting Alchemist. Needle felting needles in needle felting is a little bit like which wool to use in needle felting. There's so much choice and it does feel it's like some kind of dark art as to which ones we need to be using, and is it going to make a massive difference if we use the wrong ones. So today is my first installment of the kind of needle felting needles that are out there, and hopefully I'm going to be able to iron out all those concerns regarding which needles you need to be using and what they actually do. So what are needle felting needles? Well, they enable us to felt the wool together. So effectively, whilst you get lots of different types of needles, all they are is a metal needle, and then along the shaft of the needle you will have all these different barbs, and the barbs will vary depending on the type of job that you want your needle to do. So as you penetrate the needle into the wool, what happens is those barbs then connect to the fibres of the wool, and then that helps them to felt down and compact and entangle together. When you remove the needle, it comes out cleanly, so then you can go back in again and keep stabbing and stabbing and stabbing and entangling those fibres and that wool together until you compact it. And the more you stab it, the harder and firmer the wool's going to be. So that's what enables us to shape needle felting wool, especially things like wool bats, because if we stab something in a certain location or in a certain way, eventually we're going to get some kind of shape that we can then use to create a sculpture with. So that's what a needle felting needle is. So in addition to the different types of needles you can also get different sizes, and the lower the gauge means the coarser the needles. So for instance, if you were looking at, say, a 36 gauge needle, that would be a coarse needle, so you would probably use that for something like doing the core wall of the sculpture, so really getting that core element of your sculpture felted down initially. Whereas if you were going to make something that needed a lot more precision and you wanted something very fine, then you would use a fine or an extra fine needle, and that would be something like a 40 or a 42 gauge needle. So you've also got, in addition to all the different types, the different sizes to bear in mind as well. So the first needles I'm going to be looking at today with you are the twisted needles, and I've chosen twisted because they're one of my favourites and I use them a lot. So this is a twisted or a spiral needle. So some people call them spiral, some twisted, but it's a bit potatoes, it's the same thing. It doesn't really make any difference as to what you call it. So effectively you've got this needle, and on the shaft where you penetrate it into the wool, if you turn it, it twists around. So I don't know if you can see that on camera if I spin my needle, but the needle itself is kind of twisted, and along this twist you've got these barbs, and these barbs go all the way. Hello, yes, that's okay, you've eaten enough, you may take it over to the kitchen. And these barbs go all the way down to the end, to the point of the needle. And that means that it's really good for felting things down really quickly. It's a really quick felter. Now this is one of my extra fine needles, and I really like using these when I'm doing things like making people or fairies or things like that, and I want to get a really smooth surface for my skin. So normally what I'll do is I'll either use one on its own or I'll use two together, and I'll use them very lightly all over. What I usually use is something like this. So this is a pink merino wool bats that I use for a lot of my flesh coloured work, and I will felt it and felt it very lightly, and there's very little resistance here because the needle is so fine. So you would never use a fine needle for doing core work because it would just take you forever and a day, and you'd lose the will to live after a while. So these needles are much better for doing more sort of surface work when you're finishing things off, but they are excellent for getting a lovely smooth finish to your sculptures, so I would definitely recommend them for that. The other thing I really like about this needle as well is that because the barb goes all the way down to the end of the needle, down to the point, what you'll find is you get a very small hole when you take the needle out, whereas other needles you might get a bit more of a larger indentation. With these you don't. It's very subtle, and you can kind of get rid of any indentations very easily by just giving it a bit of a rub afterwards, and it goes away. So I really like that about this needle. So in terms of sizings for these needles, they come in 4 different sizes. So they start off with your 36 gauge, and that's your coarse needle, not your very coarse, just your coarse needle. It's then a 38 gauge, which would be your medium needle, and that's really good all-rounder. So you can use that for doing things like core work, but then you can also use it for doing things like surface work as well. So it's great as a an all-rounder needle. You then have your fine needle, and then finally your very fine needle. I really like the fine needles and the very fine needles for doing lots of finishing off of my sculptures. Like I said earlier, it's great for doing things like skin as well, because you get that lovely smooth finish with very few indentations. So that is the twisted or spiral needle. So I really hope you found that interesting, and I hope you found it useful. Please give this needle a go. I would highly recommend it, especially if you've just started out needle felting and you don't really know which needles to go for. I would definitely recommend this one. I use it all the time in all of my work, and it definitely makes life a lot easier, and you do get a lovely professional finish when you've completed your sculpture. So I really hope you found that useful. If you did, please like this video. I'm going to be posting about more needles as the days go by, so stay tuned so you can learn a bit more about what they all do and their different uses. And also please feel free to subscribe to my channel as well, because I'm posting daily at the moment, so there'll be lots of helpful handy hints, tips and needle felting tutorials for you too. So for now I'm going to say goodbye, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.